Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to this edition of the History of Christianity Season 2. We're on part 27 today. We're finishing one that we actually started last week, and the topic is the rationalist option. This is the second half of that one, and this is part of a series of 3 philosophical positions that were prominent during the 17th and 18th centuries. So we'll finish this one today, and then after that we'll have 2 others that we're going to discuss. So we start by looking at David Hume. David Hume, who lived from 1711 to 1776, was skeptical about much that the philosophers said. He took as his starting point John Locke's empiricism. This was a guy who didn't just take what the philosophers at this time were saying about rationalism, and he particularly took issue with John Locke's empiricism. He came to the conclusion that the scope of true knowledge was much more limited than the rationalists claimed. Now, why would he think that? He believed that a large portion of what these philosophers thought they could affirm on the basis of observation and reason had no such basis, but was simply the result of irrational mental habits. So his point was that these philosophers were saying you could make these observations and you could find truth in the world based on what you could absolutely know, and you could absolutely know it if you could observe it to be true. And what David Hume said was some of those things that they're saying you can observe, you really can't observe them, not in the way that they say that you can. So let's look further at what that means. Among such things that the mind takes for granted are fundamental notions such as substance and cause and effect. Now, I'm going to tell you, we're kind of moving through this philosophy discussion, and we're going to be doing at least 2 more weeks of this, possibly more depending on how long the chapters are. So I'm going to just warn you now, if you're not into the philosophy stuff, this might be a little bit challenging to get through. I'm going to try to make it as easy to get through as I can, but just know you're going to be seeing some philosophical thinking that if you're not into that, you're going to think, what in the world are these people? They're making these arguments that are just dumb because they're questioning things that we all know to be correct. But understand that this is really getting down to the nuts and bolts of what we think and why we can be sure about things. And it does have a really big connection with religion, because the major questions at this time revolved around understanding who God was and how you can be sure that God, the God we believe in, is real, and that there's life beyond this life, and that we have a soul. All of those things are philosophical questions in a lot of ways. And so he what's he saying here? He's saying that things that we say we can observe are things that we're not necessarily observing in them. Our mind is just making decisions, or it's drawing conclusions, I guess would be the better way to say it. And it's not that you actually saw it, but your mind saw something happen and drew a conclusion about it. So, all right, what are we talking about with that? The empiricists claim that only knowledge which is based on experience is true. So they wanted to be very sure about what they believed, and so they said you can doubt everything until you experience it for yourself, and then you can be sure about it then. But Hume pointed out that no one has ever seen or experienced cause and effect. All right, here we go. What does that mean? Here's an example. We have seen that when a billiard ball, a pool ball, arrives at the place where another one is lying, we first hear a noise, then we see the first ball stop and the second one move. Repeating the experiment several times brings similar results. So what is this talking about? Well, you see a ball, it moves, it goes to a place where another ball is, and all of a sudden that one moves. And if you do that as many times as you want to do it, you get the same result. All right, well, what does that tell us? Then we say that the movement of the first ball caused the movement of the second. But the truth is, we have not seen any such thing. You hit the pool ball, it moves, it takes space right next to the one that it's gonna hit, and then that one moves. Well, did you see the cause of the movement? You did. There's a transfer of energy, right? When a moving object hits a stationary object, there's a transfer of energy. Well, did you see that transfer of energy? No, you don't see that. You can't see that. It's impossible to see it. You see the results of it and you draw a conclusion based on what you've seen. But his point is the actual thing, if you're going to go by pure observation, that is the basis for everything, and you're going to base your belief system and what you know to be correct purely on observation, then you have to at least be honest about what you have actually seen. And you didn't actually see that. You saw the result of something happening, but we didn't actually see it. And we say, well, the first ball caused the second one to move. Well, we know that's true, but did we actually observe it? All that we have seen is a series of phenomena. It is our mind which has linked them by means of the notion of cause and effect. So we know that when this action happens, then that action is going to happen. Not saying it's not true. I mean, we obviously, all of us know that the pool ball hitting the other ball makes it move. But if you want to say that it's pure observation and not just some things that your mind makes decisions about or has linked different activities together to draw a conclusion, basically what he says here, cause and effect. You can't see cause and effect. You can make a conclusion based on what you see happen, but you don't actually see it happen. You don't see the transfer of energy from one ball to the next to make it move. It's true. I mean, does it really need to be said? Well, when it gets to philosophy, I guess it does, because you're making decisions based on what, and for this philosophical school, what it is that you say is happening, what you've actually seen. That's gonna point you in the direction you need to go. Well, if your life's going to be led like that, then you can't then say things that you haven't actually seen you did see. The last step taken by any who see a series of phenomena that are seemingly related has no basis in empirical observation. That was his point. He's not saying, again, that the balls didn't make each other move or one didn't make the other one move. That's not it. We know that it did. It's that you say that you're only going by empirical observation, but then if you say something is absolutely correct or you draw a conclusion that's not based on empirical observation because it can't be, then you can't really honestly say that that's empirical. It is just the result of our mental habits. Therefore, according to the empiricist definition, it is not rational knowledge. So he's making a point that there's kind of a little bit of there's a problem in this thinking. There's a hole in the logic. And David Hume makes that point. And it is a legitimate point. Again, you get with these guys, you get into, guys, you're complicating things too much on this. There's a lot of value here, but then on the other hand, depending on how you look at it, you can think, oh, there's some crazy stuff with this. Anyway, let's move on. And we know David Hume had a serious critique of empiricism. We already saw the beginnings of it. He's going to continue with this idea. The same can be said of the idea of substance. We say we see an apple. Oh, man, again, here we go. This was nutty. We say we see an apple, but in reality, all we really see is a series of attributes: form, color, weight, flavor, smell, etc. This is where David Hume loses me. I get the pool ball one. I do understand that one. I'm having a hard time understanding this one. I don't, rationally speaking, in pure rational terms, I can't say that I saw an apple. I saw a series of attributes, but not the actual thing. Man, I don't get it. Maybe y'all do. I hope you do. You can explain it to me, but I don't understand this. We also see that those attributes coincide in one place and that they seem to cling together as if something unites them. Yeah, it's called an apple. Then our mind, in one of those habits that are not truly rational, declares that all these attributes reside in a substance that we call apple. Again, trying to give this the weight it deserves, because this is really important. He's not saying it's not an apple. That's not the point. What he's saying is the empirical, the rationalists are saying that purely by experience, you can observe an apple and know that it's an apple. And he's saying you can't. All you can do is observe there's a series of attributes. Your mind then takes those and formulates this is an apple. And so he's not critiquing that we have apples or not. You read this and think that way. That's not it. What he's critiquing is that empiricism is actually 100% valid. And he said there's some problems with it. And I mean, in that sense, I do get it. In the sense of trying to strip an apple down to form, color, weight, flavor, smell, I really don't understand that. Honestly, I don't. I just don't see how. I mean, how can I even say that there's form or color or way? Anyway, it's beyond me. Again, I'm sorry. I'm going too much into this. It doesn't matter what I think about it. Let's move on. But we have not experienced the substance itself. Pure empirical reason does not allow us to affirm that there are such things as substances in which reside the various attributes that we perceive. I'm gonna just let that statement stand as it is. That's what David Hume said. This critique of empiricist rationalism raised serious questions about deism. This is where it gets important, because now you take that and understand that the rationalist's objective by going through all of this is to get to what we can actually hold to be true and know for certain. And then if you can take that and apply it to God, then you can say for certain there is a God, or you can say for certain we have a soul, or you can say for certain there is an eternity that we're going to spend in a good place or a bad place, or whatever you think about what's going to happen to the soul of the human being after they die. And if you strip that all away, though, and say that you can't know any of this, then it takes away the entire argument of rationalism when it comes to religious matters. And so that's where he's coming from. And again, the guy's not trying to say there's not a God. He's just saying the arguments that empiricists and rationalists in general are using to try to get you to the place where you can say for sure there is a God, they're not valid. And deism is where he's going to kind of hit on this. If the relation of cause and effect is not truly rational, the proof that the deists use for the existence of God, that someone must have caused this world, is no longer valid. So he's saying you can't say that somebody created the world given the strict rules of rationalism, because you would have had to observe that. And you couldn't observe it. You can't observe God. You can't observe a soul. You can't observe any of this stuff. I mean, he's even saying you can't even say an apple's an apple. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he said you can't even say a planet's a planet. I don't know. But by the pure rationalism, you can't get there. So it takes away their argument for the existence of God. Their rationalist thinking cannot lead to a conclusion of a certainty that there is God. And that's where he's getting to. And that part I understand. Some of the stuff just goes too far. It may really make sense to some people, but for a lot of people, it's not going to make any sense, and you're going to lose them. And like I said, the pool ball, I'm with you through the pool ball. When we get to the apple, my mind's just not strong enough, I guess. You've lost me. Likewise, notions such as the soul and God have little meaning if we cannot rationally speak of anything but attributes and never of substances beyond those attributes. So that obviously, if rationalism can only get you to the substances or can only get you to the attributes, then you can't say really anything about anything, honestly. There's very little that you could. But many felt that Hume's argument was flawed. One of those was James Reed. Reed argued for the value of self-evident knowledge or common sense. For this reason, his position became known as common sense philosophy. As a result, in spite of Hume's critique, deist views did not disappear. So not a lot of time for James Reed, but he probably would be in the side that most of us would be on with this, is that, come on, man, it's not doing us any good to sit here and argue about whether an apple's an apple. I mean, we all know it's an apple. So that's common sense. We all have the same knowledge. You can say it's not through observation that our mind's just making a decision, but if every single person does that, then it is valid. And so you can't throw all of it out on a logical basis, because there's a level of reason or there's knowledge that it's just self-evident. I mean, you can pick it apart all you want to, but an apple is still an apple at the end of the day. So, that's probably more of the line where I'd fall on this, but I do see Hume's point too. And I think that he's showing that if you live your life purely by strict rationalism, you really can't draw the conclusions that you say you could. And in that sense, I do agree with it. All right, let's move on, because my head's starting to hurt and it's about to even hurt worse. So let's go. This kind of thinking also brought into France some new philosophical thinking that's going to be similar to it, but in some key ways it's going to be different as well. Meanwhile, new currents of thought were developing in France and other areas of Europe. So not just France, but in particular France. The great figure of this new philosophy was Francois-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire. So you may not remember Francois-Marie Arouet in your history, but I bet you remember the name Voltaire. He's a pretty prominent guy. His political views led to a period of imprisonment in the Bastille, and exile in London, and several years of expatriation in Switzerland. So not exactly a big popular dude with the politicians. They didn't like him much, and you're going to see why in just a moment. But these efforts only made his teachings more popular. He was an enemy of all fanaticism, having witnessed the persecution of French Protestants during the last year of Louis XIV's reign. Remember, Louis XIV was the Sun King, and he was very well respected in France, thought of highly in what he did. He's called the Sun King because everything kind of revolved around him in France. But Voltaire and his father actually too felt like Louis XIV he ended on a bad note, and it hurt his reputation because he had struck out against the Protestants. And we talked about that already. But this was his point, is that, this fanaticism, this going against people and not having some tolerance is actually hurting. It's not helping, it's actually hurting. When he read Locke's writings on political and religious tolerance, he took up that cause, devoting his literary abilities to it. He was a real satirical guy. So he really caught on with the common people. They liked what he wrote. They liked the humor in it. They liked the satire. And it appealed to them. Now, people in the upper echelons that were kind of targets of his didn't necessarily love him so much. But he did not take up the optimistic rationalism of his day. Voltaire and his followers were rationalists in their own way. So it was rationalism, but a little bit different vein of it. Voltaire did believe in the use of reason as common sense, so he would have gone along with what Reed said. He argued that the history of humankind was no more than the history of a progressive understanding of ourselves and our institutions and our efforts to adjust to that understanding. So he's saying that human history boils down to just us trying to figure our own selves out and how the right way is to go about doing things. And why is it that we rule the way we do? Why is it that we have religion the way we do? Why is it that we have family relationships the way we do? Understanding all that, and then to adjust and progress as we go. So he was very forward thinking. In particular, this meant progress in the understanding and safeguarding of human rights. So this is the period of time that we're getting into with a lot of the thinking that's going to bring about the French Revolution and eventually the American Revolution, both of them. And it's going to be these kind of guys coming around and challenging the conventional thought that already is being challenged among the common people. They're fed up with politics, they're fed up with monarchs, they're fed up with religion, because all of it's been a big fat mess, and it's only ever hurt them primarily. The common people. It hasn't been the nobility or the monarchs that have been hurt, although, I mean, sometimes there have been, but by and large, it's not them. They're sheltered from all of it. It's the common folks, and they are not loving it. They've had enough. And so when Voltaire comes along and says stuff like this, and some of these other guys we're going to read about, they're like, right on, I'm with you on that. And that's going to carry right on in to huge movements in world history, and to the biggest in the history of the West for sure, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. Monarchy, although necessary, was not intended for the benefit of the sovereign, but rather for that of the subjects, whose rights must be respected and defended. So these are the thinking that's going to be used to justify the French Revolution. And for those of us that are Americans, we're very familiar with this thing when it comes to the thinking that brought about the American government, that the rulers are there to benefit the people. They're there to take care of the people. They serve for the people, not for their own selves. Now, we're based on that. It doesn't mean that we actually do it that way anymore. It doesn't seem like we do to me, and a lot of times, maybe not every time, but yet that's what we're based on. Voltaire was one of the forerunners of the French Revolution. So yeah, definitely going to be a guy very influential in what's to come. One of Voltaire's contemporaries, Charles Louis de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu, sought to apply the principles of reason to the theory of government. He came to the conclusion that a republic is a better form of government than either despotism or monarchy. Since power corrupts, government should be exercised by three powers that would balance and limit each other: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. So Again, if you're in part of the or know anything about the U.S. government system, that should sound very familiar. Montesquieu's ideas, formed by 1748, predated the American and French revolutions by several decades. So these ideas were already out there. These founding fathers coming up with the American form of government, the French Revolution, those involved in that, they already had these thoughts. They had studied them and come to the same conclusions. At about the same time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was expounding on revolutionary theories of his own. According to him, what we call progress is not really such. What has actually happened is that humankind has progressively departed from its natural state and fallen into artificiality. So Voltaire would say everything's progressing forward. We're learning more about ourselves. Things are getting better. We are evaluating our institutions and trying to improve them. We've got a straight line of progress going forward. And Rousseau would say the opposite of that. He's saying, well, things have not gone the right way. We've progressed, but we're progressively getting away from our natural state and what we actually should be and falling into artificiality. So he might have agreed with progress, but he wouldn't have looked at it as being a positive thing. He's saying we need to get back to some of the stuff we used to have. In politics, this means that we should return to the original order whose purpose was to serve the governed by safeguarding justice and freedom. Again, thoughts that were very influential when it comes to the founding of America and the American Revolution and also the French Revolution. Rulers are employees of the people, and their task is to defend freedom and justice. Again, rulers of that day, that's not the way they thought. They did not think of themselves as employees of the people at all. But thinking is changing, and the times are going to change. And there's some revolutions coming to make sure that they do. In the field of religion, Rousseau believed that dogmas and institutions are part of the corruption that has characterized the so-called human progress, and it is necessary to return to natural religion, belief in God, the immortality of the soul, and the moral order. So Rousseau is kind of making the observations that other people of his time have, that all these dogmatic positions that people are taking that are leading to killing people and burning them at the stake and getting into big wars that hurt the common people is no good. You need to throw all that out. And let's just get back to what we can all agree on. And at this time, it would be pretty much the population. We all can believe there's a God, and we may not all believe everything that we have about him, all of our dogmas, but we believe there's a God. We all believe that our soul is immortal, and we all believe in the moral order, that there's right and wrong morally because of God. You just kind of all stick with that and forget this other stuff. Obviously, you can't do that, but it was just the way people were starting to think because they'd had so much of the other way, the other extreme, and it just had led to such bad stuff that they didn't want to deal with it anymore. These various philosophers, each in their own way, gave French rationalism a unique flavor, shunning the speculative flights of other rationalists and concentrating rather on the social and political implications of reason understood as common sense. So they're going to be very influential on religious matters and also very influential on political matters going forward. By so doing, they were preparing the way for the French Revolution. It's just going to come, and we'll be talking about that very soon. But we can't move on without talking about one other guy, and that's Immanuel Kant. These philosophical movements of the 17th and 18th centuries led to the shattering critique of Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804 is when he lived. So this guy Kant, he saw what was going on. He had studied these philosophies, and he's going to have even more critique about them in general, and he's not going to go along with them. He had started as a firm believer in rationalism until he read Hume. So he was right there with the rationalists until Hume changed his mind. In his critique of pure reason, Kant proposed a radical alternative to these systems. According to him, there is no such thing as innate ideas, but there are fundamental structures of the mind, and within those structures we must place whatever data the senses provide us. I can't say that I necessarily agree with all of it. I can't say that I necessarily agree with any of it, actually. But I also can say that a great deal is I don't really understand. So I is thinking that, to me, you just go too far. You go too far with some of this. I'm not trying to throw these guys out. Please understand, this is my weakness. It's not theirs. But some of this stuff, I just think, man, you just get so out of anybody's real honest way of thinking that they can't follow you. Oh, here we go. Let's go through. Those structures are first of all time and space, and then 12 categories, and some examples of those are causality, and some examples of those are causality, existence, and substance. So these are 12 categories that are the structures that we're trying to fit everything into so we can know how to think about it. Time, space, and the 12 categories are not something that we perceive through the senses. So these are things that you can't perceive. You can't have rationalism, can't bring you to these things. They are the structures our mind has to use in order to organize the sensations that are fed to them by the senses. So what we're getting from the senses has to be, our mind has to make sense of it. And the way we do it is we put them into these categories. And the categories are not things we've observed. They're just what we put, the stuff we sense into. So anyway, that's it. That's what he's getting at. To make something thinkable, we must place it within the molds of our mental structures. Okay. So we have to be able to kind of make sense of things. I get that. It is only after the mind orders them within the structures of time, space, and the categories that they become intelligible experiences. Okay. I get what you're saying here, Kant. You got to be able to know how to think about these things, and in order to do that, your mind's got to be able to make some sense of it. And so the mind has a mechanism for doing that. I get it. Okay. In knowledge, what we have is not things as they are in themselves, but rather things as our mind is able to grasp them. I do agree with this. Your own mind can trick you. Think about somebody who saw an accident. If you talk to 5 different people that saw an accident, they all have different things they say they saw. Not any one is going to be exactly the same as somebody else's. And some of that has to do with just perception, what we think we saw. Our mind can fill in the gaps when we don't actually see things. And I've read some stuff about this. I'd really love to get into it, but I don't have time to. But I've even read some things where your mind can actually trick you into thinking you saw something that you actually didn't see. And there's been some experiments. Or your mind can process something that's going to happen like a few seconds before it does, or not seconds, like milliseconds before it does. So like if you were to watch a ball rolling towards the edge of the table about to go over the side, your mind might tell your body or your eyes that you saw it before it actually happened. So you might actually, in your own perception, see the ball go over the side of the table. We're not talking about seconds. We're talking about fractions and fractions of seconds. But it's still that, we say seeing is believing, but even that's not 100% because your mind can trick you into seeing things you don't. Anyway, this is getting way out there. But I agree with what he's saying here because I think that it's been shown to be true. Therefore, there is no such thing as purely objective knowledge, and pure rationalism is no more than an illusion. I think it's going too far. That's what I'm saying. I think you make some good points, but then you go off the deep end with this stuff. And Kant, you're just like the rest of these guys. You can't just go part way. I guess that's what philosophy does. I don't know. But anyway, you throw out everything and you can't really know it. Rationalism, observation can't lead you. It's just an illusion. To me, again, going too far. Kant's work also meant that many of the arguments traditionally used in support of Christian doctrine were no longer valid. Obviously, you start throwing everything out, then you don't really have it. For example, since existence is not a datum derived from reality, but rather one of the categories of the mind, there is no way to prove the existence of God or of the soul. And I don't necessarily agree with Kant on all this stuff. Some of it I do, some I don't. But you can't prove the existence of God 100%. There is a lot of proof for God, and there's a lot of evidence for God. But to prove through experience or rationalism the existence of God is impossible. So I'd agree with that. This does not mean an absolute denial of God or the soul. And that's the thing. I think some people have taken some of these things and used them to try to say that these guys didn't believe. They're not questioning the existence of God. They're questioning the rationale for saying that you can be certain there is God. And they're saying these arguments that have been coming up have holes in them. And they do. But then Kant's stuff does too. This is human reason. We are flawed human beings. Our systems are not going to be perfect. That's why doctrinal systems, those of you that really prescribe to these schools of doctrine and theology so closely that you don't even want to break one little bit, understand that was created by a human being. It's based on the Word of God. I'm not saying it's not, but it's created by a human being, so it's going to be flawed ultimately. There is going to be some mistake in it. You just have to realize that. There's nothing you do about it. It's called being a human being. All these systems have holes in them, and every one of them can be seen to be that way, including Kant's himself. As for religion, Kant argues that there is practical reason that has to do with the moral life and whose procedure is different from that of pure reason. So he's saying, well, there is some reason behind it. It's just not the pure reason. This practical reason does know the existence of God as the judge of all action, of the soul and its freedom as the occasion for moral action, and life after death as the means for rewarding good and punishing evil. So he's saying the practical reason that he's talking about here will lead you to these things. It's just not the pure reason. All of this was very similar to what the deists had said, so Kant did not go much beyond them. So he didn't really have a ton to say about religious stuff. He kind of just took the deist position and then moved on. Kant's philosophical work dealt a death blow to the easy rationalism of his predecessors and to the notion that it is possible to speak in purely rational and objective terms of matters such as the existence of God and the future life. And that's absolutely true. Naturalism cannot prove supernatural things. And the thought that it could is just wrong. That's why when anybody says that science disproves God, that's wrong. That can't. The scientific method is dependent on observation. Well, you can't observe God. You can only observe what is in the natural world. God is supernatural. The concepts of God and the spirit realm are supernatural concepts. Science can't have anything to say about those, honestly. And so it's really not relatable. So anybody that says that science can disprove God, really, you don't understand what science is. And you don't understand what the supernatural is either and how they're different. So this is true. You can't through pure reason and through observation prove the existence of God. You can't. It's an impossibility. After him, theologians dealing with the relationship between faith and reason had to take his work into account, and it changed some of the ways these things are being argued. So by me saying all that, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying there's not evidence for God. I believe there's very strong evidence for God, for the creation of all that we see being an intelligent design, not just poof, it happened out of thin air. I mean, we're not going to get into all that in this discussion, but you can definitely research it and find it. That's there. There's strong evidence, but outright proof like the rationalists are trying to say that you can be certain beyond a shadow of a doubt because of strictly what you observe, that can't lead you to the existence of God. It won't work that way. It's too easily defeated. So to have those arguments are actually counterproductive. And I think that's the thing that it makes you thinking about it in a different way. That's actually good. Eventually, others would take his views much further, questioning the universality and the immutability of the categories of the mind and arguing that factors such as psychology, culture, and language help shape those categories. So, of course, the followers are going to take what the leader or originator said and then try to add to it or expand it. Thus, Kant's work, which in some ways was the high point of modern philosophy, and others set the stage for the postmodern critique of the modern insistence on objectivity and universality as signs of true knowledge. So Kant kind of was the pinnacle of his own time, and then he also led into the new way of thinking as well. So I hope you can see through this discussion on rationalism how important this thinking was to developing ideas about God and the things that we in religion study and how to be able to actually say we do reason in a way, or human reason can lead you to these beliefs, and why there's holes in that thinking as well. So that's all we have time for today. Next week, we're going to jump into the next philosophy we're going to look at, and I hope that you'll be back with me again. We'll try to do it all in one session. Hopefully we can. If not, we'll break it up. But regardless of that, hope you can be back. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and God bless.